All right, this is tape number 23, and in this tape we're going to take up the general ideas of the U.S. Constitution. So, you got these framers of the Constitution, these guys who'd been together. They drafted the Declaration of Independence, they created a government, the Continental Congress, didn't work very well. Then they said, let's create an Articles of Confederation. That didn't work very well. They said, we got to try something again. So they were 0 for 2. They said, let's go with this Constitution. So they went with the Constitution, but what were they thinking about? Turns out they were thinking about 4 different things. The first one is pure genius. They came up with the idea of using political power to control political power. Okay? Use political power to control political power. In other words, these were people who really knew politicians. They were all politicians themselves. And they knew that politicians like to grab power. And they wanted to avoid what they had been dealing with the King of England, King George, in which power was rested in one hand. So what they did is they divided power. They called it separation of powers. And then they used that divided power to check each other and balance each other. So, I'm sure in your high school or in other places you've heard of separation of powers and checks and balances. This is what it is. Use political power to control political power. If you were to come back in, let's say, 1,000 years and you were to study government, what would happen would be very simple. You would study the U.S. Constitution because of this here. This is why the Constitution is remembered. This is why the Constitution works so well. It controls the political ambition to get more power. So, the framers deliberately set that up. What that leads to sometimes is gridlock. What it leads to sometimes is that Congress and the president can't seem to get things done. That's by design. Because the opposite of that is that things happen and we lose out. The politicians get power and we lose power. So this is a system designed to create tension, to create conflict, to create inefficiency. Okay? Political power is used to control political power. Number 2. The second idea in the Constitution is there is a strong emphasis on individual rights. A strong emphasis on individual rights. Very simply, the Constitution, with the Bill of Rights added to it, really makes the case that we, the people, matter. Our rights matter. Okay? There is no getting around the Constitution when you look at it, especially with the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and eighth amendments to the Constitution. There's no getting around that they just make a strong statement that individual people matter. Our rights matter. Okay? Number 3. There is a separation of political and economic power. There's a separation of political and economic power. I have not talked about economics when I've talked about the Constitution for a simple reason. The Constitution doesn't talk about economics. It's a political document focused on government. And in essence, the message from it is very simple to the American people. The message is, hey, you do what you want to do. We don't care about your livelihood. We care about the structure of government. So, if you want to be a farmer, go ahead and be a farmer. If you want to be a landlord, be a landlord. If you want to run a bar, run a bar. By not talking about economics, and I have to be honest, there is one clause that does. It's called the Commerce Clause, and it allows the government to regulate interstate commerce between the states. But other than that, it doesn't say anything about economics. And by doing that, it allows for the creation of whatever the people decide to create. So, why do we have a capitalist system here? Why do we have a free enterprise system here? It's very simple. Constitution didn't talk about it. And because it didn't talk about it, that's what you've got left. Okay? So this is a key point. The fourth one. Consent of the governed. Consent of the governed. And you go, what does that mean? What does that mean? Let me explain it this way. Okay? In this class, American national government, who has power? Do you, the students, have power? Or do I have power? When many of you in previous classes, many of the students in previous classes, when they confronted this question, they all said very simply that I had the power because I was the one who made the grades. I was the one who set up the requirements to get those grades. And I don't argue that. I totally agree. I do that. But I would argue that that is ignoring something very, very simple. Okay? And what it's ignoring, I'm going to move this to block that sun right there. What it's ignoring is a very simple principle. You all, as students, if you work together, can take over the class. If you decide that you don't like the way I'm teaching, you can go down to the administration building, Machen building, and look up my boss. His name is Dr. Matt Dowd. He is the vice president for academic affairs here at McMurray. You can say that Fabrizio guy doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know how to teach. Get rid of him. Okay? You can do that. Now, if one of you went, wouldn't really happen. Okay? But if all of you went, then it would. If I came into class one day and lo and behold, I turned on Microsoft Teams, there was nobody there. I looked in front of me in the class, there was nobody there. Everybody was gone. Guess what? You all are denying me consent. You are saying, we don't consent to this class. We don't consent to the way it's going. Okay? I'm denied consent. I can't govern. In the end, you govern. For me, the most important day is not the first day of the class. It's the second day. On the first day, I hand out the syllabus. On the second day, I see how many people come back. I explained the class the first day. You all had a look at it. Do you want to come back? When you come back, I know you've given consent. Consent of the governed. Same thing happens with the United States government. Very simple. U.S. government has a constitution. They teach you about it in school. I teach you about it. Do you give consent? Are we rioting in the streets in a large measure? Well, some of that rioting in the streets is, in fact, people denying consent to the police, local governments, whatever, for the way that they operate. That's a denial of consent. What if people don't pay their taxes? During the Vietnam War in the 1960s, there was a movement, actually, not to pay taxes. And when that happened, the government got really nervous, because if people don't pay taxes, what can happen? Governments have real difficulty. Okay? We can deny consent by not voting. We can deny consent by not paying our taxes, not participating in things. There are ways that the people can deny consent. And this Constitution, in the end, is predicated on the idea that we, the people, consent. So, 4 ideas behind the Constitution. Political power is used to control political power. And this is the key one. What makes our Constitution special? There's a strong emphasis on individual rights. There's a separation of political and economic power. And in the end, we give consent. Okay? Consent of the governed. We are governed only because we agree to it. All right? When we come back in the next tape, we're going to be talking more about some of the powers of the government.